They were healers and heretics, priestesses and monsters. From the golden temples of Egypt to the shadowed forests of Europe, whispers of witchcraft have haunted humanity for over 5,000 years. Empires feared it, kings tried to destroy it, and yet it survived, changing its face from ancient magic to medieval trials, from sacred ritual to forbidden cult. This is the untold journey of witchcraft, its birth in the myths of gods, its blood-soaked persecution, and the secret ways it still walks among us today. Stay with me, because by the end, you may never see history of witchcraft or magic the same way again. Before the word witch was ever spoken, before kingdoms rose or fell, there was magic, not the polished illusions of fairy tales or the stage, but a raw, untamed force, born from humanity's deepest fears and its greatest hopes. To truly understand witchcraft, we must journey back tens of thousands of years to a time when human life was fragile, when we lived in small, scattered tribes, surrounded by dangers we could barely comprehend. The night was alive, with predators stalking in the dark, storms rolling in without warning, and shapes moving just beyond the reach of firelight. In those shadows, some believed there were ways to bend the world to your will. Archaeologists tell us that the belief in magic predates written history by tens of thousands of years. The evidence hides in the walls of caves, like those in Lascaux, France, painted some 17,000 years ago. There, we see half-human, half-animal figures, beings scholars believe may represent spirits, gods, or shamans caught in a trance. To the people who painted them, everything in the world was alive, not just animals, but rivers, trees, mountains, even the stones beneath their feet. This worldview, known today as animism, is the root from which almost all magical traditions have grown. To them, magic wasn't unnatural. It was simply part of nature's fabric, woven into every living thing. To our ancestors, invisible forces walked beside them. The hunt could be blessed or cursed. A storm could be called or calmed. And somewhere between the world of the living and the unseen realm of spirits walked the first practitioners of magic. In those early societies, a few individuals stood apart. People believed to have one foot in this world and one in the spirit world. They were the shamans, the medicine men, the medicine women. Their role was vital. They healed the sick, sought visions for the tribe, and sometimes they guided the souls of the dead into the afterlife. The tools they used are ones we still recognize in later witchcraft. The rhythmic beating of drums and the shaking of rattles to slip into a trance, herbs and roots with both healing and hallucinogenic powers, charms and talismans to ward off malevolent spirits. Some dressed in animal skins and masks, believing that by wearing the likeness of a creature, they could take on its strength, its speed, or its cunning. In this way, the bond between human and animal, a connection that would later reappear in witchcraft traditions of familiars, was born. The shaman was healer, guide, and sometimes a figure to be feared. They could save a life or curse it. And their power came not from kings or temples, but from the unseen world itself. In a world without medicine, without science, without any way to predict the future, magic was a survival tool. It was how humans made sense of the chaos around them, and how they tried to control it. For healing, the earliest magic blended natural remedies with spiritual appeals. Willow bark to ease pain, yarrow to staunch bleeding, but always with chants, prayers, or whispered invocations to summon unseen help. before hunting, rituals were often performed before the chase. Tribes would act out the hunt in elaborate dances, believing this sympathetic magic would ensure success. In some caves, paintings of animals may have been part of this same practice. To draw the image was, in some way, to capture the creature's spirit before the real hunt began. And then there was the weather. In a world where a dry season could mean starvation, the ability to call rain or to keep away a devastating storm was seen as nothing short of divine power. Shamans claimed to speak with the wind, to summon clouds, to still the thunder. To the early human mind, there was no hard line between a prayer and a spell, between worship and magic. It was all part of the same desperate, beautiful attempt to survive. With the rise of civilization came the birth of writing, and magic made the leap from memory to record. In the city-states of ancient Mesopotamia, some 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, spells and rituals were inscribed on clay tablets. The people of Sumer and Akkad divided magic into two realms, one for protection and blessing, and one for cursing and destruction. Their world was filled with demons, spirits, and gods, all of whom could be influenced through precise ritual. One famous series of texts, known as the Maklu, described an elaborate anti-witchcraft ceremony, a way to counteract curses and banish harmful magic. These weren't secret outlaw practices. They were official, sanctioned, even performed by state priests. In ancient Egypt, magic, or Hecate, was not only accepted, it was considered a divine gift bestowed upon humanity by the gods themselves. The Great Book of the Dead contained spells to protect the soul on its journey through the afterlife, amulets in the shapes of scarabs, the Eye of Horus, or sacred animals were worn to shield against evil. Pharaohs kept entire orders of priest-magicians at their command, their skills considered essential to both governance and the afterlife. By the dawn of civilization, magic had claimed its place in both temple and marketplace. It could bless a pharaoh's tomb or destroy an enemy in the night. And as human society grew more complex, so too did the art of witchcraft. In the ancient world, magic was not merely a whisper in the shadows. It was woven into the fabric of daily life, sacred and feared in equal measure. In the land of the Nile, magic was not a sideshow to faith, it was its heartbeat. The Egyptians called it Hecate, a living force believed to have existed before even the gods, a current of power that kept the universe in balance with Ma'at, the order of all things. To invoke Hecate was not superstition. It was participation in the fabric of creation itself. And so, magic flowed through everyday life. In temples, priests chanted in rhythms older than memory. In homes of mud brick along the river, mothers tied little charms to their children's wrists. A farmer might whisper a blessing over seed before the floodwaters receded, just as a court magician might speak a guarded name of a god before advising a pharaoh. Hecate belonged to everyone, priests and common people alike, because everyone needed protection, healing, and luck. Egyptian magic left us its voice in ink and stone. Unrolled on papyrus or painted on tomb walls were the spells we now call the Book of the Dead. Not a single book, but a tradition of incantations chosen like tools for a journey. For the deceased, these words were a passport through the duat, the treacherous underworld, formulas to open sealed gates, charms to silence devouring demons, and most vital, spells to keep the heart from testifying against its owner before the scales of judgment. But those same arts did not wait for death to do their work. The living borrowed them too, adapted charms for protection against illness, curses, and misfortune, words of power washed into water and sipped like medicine, prayers written, folded, and worn against the skin. Power also took shape in the palm of the hand. Amulets, small, potent icons, guarded the living and the dead alike. The eye of Horus, bright and unblinking, promised health and wholeness after terrible injury. The scarab, rolling the sun across the sky, pledged rebirth and transformation. The Ankh, looped like a key, offered the very breath of life. These were not ornaments. They were portable temples, placed on the chest of a mummy or hung from a child's neck, each one a silent sentinel against the shadow. When illness struck, Egypt answered with a braid of herb and hymn. Healers crushed plants, soothing resins, bitter barks, fragrant leaves, while voices rose in measured cadence. The words were not decoration, they were part of the cure, a bridge that invited the divine into the body. In the deserts and reed beds, danger had names: snakebite, scorpion sting, and so did salvation. Invocations to Isis, the great magician among goddesses, whose spells were said to tame venom and steady the faltering breath. Medicine and magic were two hands of the same healer. At the center of the sacred craft stood the magician priests, often the lector priests, masters of the written word. They were keepers of scrolls and secret names, readers of hymns whose syllables had to be shaped exactly, for a mispronounced word could steal the edge from a spell. Called to palaces and sickbeds, to tomb entrances at dusk, they served as Egypt's official negotiators with the unseen. Their duties were as wide as the sky: to bless a voyage, heal a wound, protect a household, and, when justice demanded it, to bind or curse what threatened the balance of Ma'at. This was Egypt's vision of witchcraft, not a crime in the shadows, but a sacred science laid openly on altars and doorframes, spoken in marketplaces and royal courts, a force to steady the cosmos, to shelter the living, and to guide the dead. In the glow of oil lamps and the hush of sanctuaries, the Egyptians did not merely believe in magic, they lived inside it. In the heart of the ancient Fertile Crescent, in the shadow of towering ziggurats and bustling marketplaces, the people of Mesopotamia lived with a constant awareness that the unseen world was as real and as dangerous as the one they could touch. Here, magic was not a pastime, it was survival. They called it apotropaic magic, powerful rites and charms designed to push back the darkness, to keep away the horrors that prowled just beyond the veil. One such horror was Lamashtu, a terrifying demoness said to stalk pregnant women, steal newborns from their mothers, and spread disease among the vulnerable. To stand against her, the Mesopotamians used protective amulets, carvings, and incantations, placing them in homes and near bedsides as spiritual shields. But protection was only half the story. Mesopotamian magic could also wound, punish, and destroy. Cursing rituals were weapons in their own right. Clay figurines, shaped in the image of one's enemy, were buried deep in the earth or smashed to pieces, the belief being that the victim's spirit would suffer the same fate. Other rites called upon dangerous spirits, summoning them not for protection, but for vengeance. And at the center of it all were the priests and exorcists, the custodians of sacred power. The Ashipu were the ritual specialists, experts in removing curses, cleansing evil spirits, and restoring spiritual balance. The Asu were healers, blending herbal medicine with spoken charms to treat both body and soul. Together they fought in what Mesopotamians saw as a constant spiritual battle, a never-ending war between humanity and malevolent forces that sought to undo it. These rituals were more than superstition. They were the living memory of a culture that stretched from Sumer to Akkad to Babylon. Layer upon layer, over centuries, their magic absorbed the beliefs of each age, Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, becoming a vast, unbroken chain of tradition. In Mesopotamia, magic was not just something you practiced, it was the shield you carried and the dagger you kept hidden. In the lands of ancient Greece, magic lived in the twilight, neither fully sacred nor entirely forbidden. It was a force that could heal, destroy, protect, or seduce, and it often lingered in the shadows where gods, spirits, and mortals met. At the heart of this mystical realm was Hecate, the triple-formed goddess of magic, crossroads, and the moonlit night. She was the guardian of thresholds, between worlds, between choices, between the living and the dead. Her torches lit the paths where spirits wandered, and her presence was felt wherever three roads met. In the dead of night, offerings of honey, cakes, and black dogs were left at these crossroads, not out of affection, but out of reverence and fear. For Hecate could guide and protect, but she could just as easily abandon the unworthy to the darkness. And then there were the sorceresses, whose names became legend. Circe, the enchantress of Homer's Odyssey, lived on a lonely island where the air was heavy with the scent of herbs and strange flowers. With a whisper and a cup of wine, she could transform men into swine, not out of cruelty, but as a test of their true nature. Medea, granddaughter of the sun god Helios, wielded magic that was both a gift and a curse. Her potions could heal grievous wounds or bring death in silence. Her spells bent the will of kings, toppled enemies, and even defied the bonds of family and love. But magic was not always the domain of gods and heroes. In bustling cities and quiet villages, ordinary people sought their own forms of power. One of the most chilling expressions of this was the cursed tablet, known to the Romans as defictiones. These were thin sheets of lead etched with words of malice or desperation. They might bind an enemy's tongue, cripple a rival's business, or even seal a lover's heart against another. Once inscribed, they were folded, pierced with nails, and hidden away in tombs, wells, or beneath the earth, left for the spirits of the dead to carry into the unseen world. Yet not all magic was meant to harm. Some was born from longing. Love potions, brews of fragrant herbs, whispered charms, and sometimes dangerous poisons were crafted to spark passion, bind lovers, or rekindle fading desire. But love magic was treacherous. Too strong a dose could turn devotion into madness, or longing into obsession. Lurking within the fabric of Greek and Roman society were the mystery cults, secret religious orders whose rites promised insight into the great cycle of life, death, and rebirth. In the Eleusinian mysteries, initiates sought the blessings of Demeter and Persephone through rituals hidden from the uninitiated. The Orphic rites whispered of a divine spark within the soul, longing for release from the cycle of mortal existence. Magic in these hidden circles was not a crude tool of manipulation. It was a sacred path to transcendence. In the ancient world, magic was neither wholly holy nor entirely profane. It was a force woven into the fabric of existence. In the glow of torchlight at the crossroads, in the sealed curse buried beneath the city streets, in the secretive sip of a potion, there the ancients found both power and peril. In every corner of the ancient world, the figure of the witch emerged, a shape-shifting presence who could heal or harm, bless or curse, guide or destroy. In Greece, there was Hecate, the torch-bearing goddess who stood at the crossroads between worlds. She was the mistress of magic, night, and the restless dead. To some, she was a guardian, warding off wandering spirits. To others, she was a shadowed figure who whispered the forbidden arts: necromancy, spellcraft, the weaving of fate. Those who sought her aid risked stepping into the darkness she ruled. Far to the north, among the frozen forests and howling winds, the Völvas, Norse Seers, practiced the ancient magic of cider. They peered beyond the veil of time, reading the tangled threads of destiny. A single word from their lips could sway the outcome of a battle or doom an entire harvest. Their power was respected, but it carried an edge of terror. For if they could weave fate, they could also unmake it. In the vast lands of the Slavs, Baba Yaga lurked deep within the forest, in a hut that stood on chicken legs, creaking and turning to face intruders. She was neither purely evil nor purely good. Some heroes found her to be a giver of wisdom and gifts, but only if they passed her deadly tests. Others met her as a predator, swallowing the unworthy without a second thought. Far to the south, in the vibrant traditions of southern Africa, the Sangomas walked between the realms of the living and the dead. They healed the sick, spoke to the ancestors, and used the earth's own medicine to restore balance. But in times of famine, plague, or unrest, even these respected healers could be accused of walking the shadow path, wielding their gifts for harm. For centuries, these figures stood outside the walls of ordinary life, feared, revered, sometimes worshipped. But then came a turning of the tide. As great organized faith spread, Christianity, Islam, and others, the language of power changed. What had once been divine magic was recast as heresy. The protective charm became a curse. The wise woman became the witch, and the witch became the enemy. Religious leaders began to brand all magic outside their blessing as demonic. The myths shifted too. Hecate's torches now lit the path to the devil's realm. Baba Yaga's tests became traps for the damned. The Sangomas' ancestor whispers were painted as lies from dark spirits. By the early Christian period, one figure loomed above all: Satan, the ultimate adversary. Any hand that worked wonders without the church's blessing was said to be guided by him. From this belief grew the seeds of suspicion, fear, and persecution. Seeds that, in centuries to come, would bloom into the witch hunts of Europe, Africa, and beyond. The witch, once a complex figure of both danger and wisdom, was now seen through a single lens: evil incarnate. And the long shadow of that transformation still falls across our imagination today. The whispers of ancient witches, Hecate at the crossroads, Baba Yaga in her wandering hut, the Sangomas calling to their ancestors, the Norse Seers weaving fate, had once existed in a twilight space between reverence and fear. But as the tides of history shifted, that twilight began to darken. The rise of Christianity across Europe brought with it not only a new faith, but a new enemy. The sacred fires of pagan magic, once a part of daily life, were recast as the flickering glow of the devil's work. Healing charms, protective talismans, even the gentle guidance of a village wise woman were no longer acts of care, but whispers of heresy. It was here, in the shadow of church steeples, that the fear began to crystallize. And in 1487, it was given a name, a weapon in ink: the Malleus Maleficarum, the witch hammer. Written by Inquisitors Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger, it was not merely a book. It was a manifesto of terror. It claimed to unmask witches, describing their alleged pacts with demons, their supposed powers to blight crops, conjure storms, and seduce men into ruin. But beneath its lurid tales, its true purpose was clear: to give religious and political authorities a manual for eradicating dissent, disguised as the fight against evil. And Europe listened. From the misty Scottish Highlands to the snow-covered villages of Germany, a fever took hold. Whispers became accusations. Accusations became arrests. And arrests became torture. Women, mostly poor, widowed, or simply different, were dragged before courts, subjected to brutal interrogations until they confessed to crimes they never committed. The witch trials became a grim theater where fear played the lead role, and the price of survival was silence. But the persecutions were not only about religion, they were about power. The label witch became a political weapon, a way to remove rivals, seize property, or enforce conformity. By the close of the medieval age, tens of thousands had been executed in Europe's frenzy to cleanse itself of witchcraft. The mythic witches of old, once guides, healers, or tricksters, were now burned into the collective memory as servants of the devil. And this fear would not fade. It would travel across oceans, planting seeds in new lands, waiting for the next chapter of the witch's tale to begin. The fires of the witch hunts have long since died, but the embers never truly went cold. In remote valleys, windswept hills, and rural villages, the old ways lingered. Folk healers still gathered herbs by moonlight. Midwives whispered protective charms into newborn ears. Farmers quietly buried talismans beneath their fields, the same rituals their ancestors once performed in open daylight, now hidden from prying eyes. But the 20th century brought a new turning point. In the ashes of superstition, a different kind of witchcraft began to rise, one not born of fear, but of identity. Wicca, emerging in mid-century Britain, reimagined the witch not as an enemy of God, but as a steward of nature. Practitioners celebrated the cycles of the moon, honored ancient deities, and reclaimed symbols once twisted by persecution. From these roots, modern paganism spread across continents, weaving together fragments of pre-Christian belief into a living, breathing spiritual path. And then came the age of mass media. Films, novels, and television shows reforged the witch in the public imagination, sometimes dark and dangerous, sometimes wise and wondrous. The silver screen turned cauldrons and broomsticks into pop culture icons. The internet, in turn, gave rise to digital covens, online communities where spells, rituals, and personal stories crossed oceans in seconds. Yet, there remains a distinction between the witchcraft feared in medieval courts, tied to pacts, demons, and accusations, and the witchcraft embraced today as a personal, often peaceful, form of spirituality. What was once the language of exile has become for many a language of empowerment. Why, across every age, every continent, every culture, have humans believed in magic? Perhaps it begins with our deepest instincts. Long before the first cities, before the first kings, humans stood beneath the night sky and felt small, vulnerable to forces they could not see. Storms that destroyed crops, sickness that claimed children, a sudden wind that carried whispers through the trees. When there was no science to explain the world, the mind created patterns. And in those patterns, power. Magic, in its earliest form, was not entertainment. It was survival. It offered a sense of control in a world ruled by chaos, a charm against sickness, a ritual to bring rain, a curse to punish enemies. And from the moment humans imagined that some among them might wield such power, the witch was born. But the witch was more than just a figure of power. She became an archetype, an idea etched into our collective unconscious. She was the outsider, the one who lived beyond the village edge, the keeper of secrets, the woman who would not bow to authority. She was the healer, midwife, herbalist, the hand that coaxed life into the world. And she was the rebel, defying kings, priests, and the rules written by men. In this way, the witch became a mirror of society's fears and desires. For the powerful, she symbolized a threat, the possibility that control could be challenged not by armies, but by whispers, rituals, and invisible forces. For the powerless, she was hope, proof that even the voiceless could wield influence, even in shadows. The psychology of witchcraft, then, is rooted in tension, order versus chaos, obedience versus freedom, the seen versus the unseen. To accuse someone of witchcraft was often to silence them. To claim witchcraft was, at times, to resist, to stand against a world that sought to dictate every breath you took. And so, across centuries, the witch has carried many faces: the demonized seductress, the wise woman, the revolutionary, each one a reflection of the society that imagined her. Because witchcraft, in the end, is never just about magic. It is about power, who has it, who fears it, and who dares to take it. In the 21st century, an age of satellites, smartphones, and space exploration, ancient fears still breathe and still kill. Across distant villages, remote valleys, and forgotten corners of the world, the word witch remains a death sentence. You'd think that education, science, and technology would erase superstition. But in some communities, especially in rural and economically struggling areas, the belief in witchcraft runs deeper than reason. A sudden illness, a bad harvest, infertility, a flood, or an earthquake, anything unexplained can be blamed on the witch. And then the hunt begins. In sub-Saharan Africa, Nigeria, Tanzania, Ghana, women, children, and the elderly are accused, beaten, and sometimes burned alive. In India, the rural heartlands of Jharkhand, Assam, Odisha, and Chhattisgarh see widows dragged from their homes, branded and killed. In Papua New Guinea, the word Sangoma, witch, can seal your fate. Torture, execution, even public spectacle, all in the name of purging evil. The victims, widows without a husband to protect them, women without children, those who speak, walk, or think differently, orphans, street children, the mentally ill, all easy prey for a community desperate to find a scapegoat. But sometimes, witchcraft isn't even about belief. It's about power. In fragile or corrupt political systems, accusing someone of witchcraft is a weapon, a way to destroy rivals, silence critics, or distract the public from failure. A family feud over land, a dispute about inheritance, jealousy of a successful woman. All it takes is one whisper, one pointed finger, and the mob does the rest. And for some, it's business. Self-proclaimed witch hunters and pastors charge desperate families for exorcisms and cleansing rituals. Rituals that cost everything they own. Victims lose their homes, their land, their lives. Fear is a powerful tool. In some cultures, fear of witchcraft is used to keep people in line, to force obedience, to crush rebellion against tradition. These beliefs run so deep that challenging them can be seen as an attack on the community itself. And the flames are fanned by misinformation, sensational news, rumors, viral videos, radio preachers warning of witches lurking in every shadow. The accused rarely stand a chance. In countries with weak courts and corrupt officials, the law looks away, or worse, joins in the persecution. These hunts break every principle of human rights, the right to life, to dignity, to freedom from torture. For the accused, even survival is a curse. They return to nothing, no home, no work, no friends, only the mark of shame. Families are shattered, children left homeless, communities torn apart, and yet the world barely whispers about it. But there is resistance. Non-governmental organizations, United Nations agencies, human rights defenders, they document, they condemn, they fight for the voiceless. Education programs try to replace superstition with science, teaching the truth about disease, mental illness, and natural disaster. But the roots of belief are tangled deep in the soil of tradition. Outsiders are often met with suspicion and sometimes hostility. The most lasting change comes from within, from local leaders, religious figures, and brave voices inside the community willing to challenge the darkness. Witch hunts are not relics of history. They are here, they are now. And for every victim, the world faces a question. How many more must die before we bury the word witch forever? Witchcraft is not a relic. It is not a dusty superstition locked in the past. It is one of humanity's oldest symbolic languages, whispered in caves, sung in forests, etched into the bones of our stories. It has survived the rise of kings, the march of empires, the shadow of the cross, and the age of the machine. When pagan altars crumbled, it hid in the folds of rural folklore. When the flames of the pyre tried to silence it, it moved into whispers, chants, and herbs gathered under moonlight. Mothers told the stories, elders kept the rituals, and in every telling, it carried more than magic. It carried identity, a link to ancestors, a memory of the world before it was divided. Witchcraft has always been a mirror, blending myth, religion, and the human need to touch the unknown. In one hand, the healer's herbs, in the other, the rebel's fire. It is the comfort of ritual, the thrill of danger, the dream of power, in a world where so much lies beyond our control. For some, it is prayer. For others, spell. For all, it is the same hunger, to shape destiny, to guard against darkness, to connect with something greater than ourselves. Even now, it calls to those who refuse to kneel to the old powers, to those who see in it a symbol of resistance, of selfhood, of defiance against the chains of politics, religion, or patriarchy. It thrives in art, in film, in books, and now in the glowing light of a screen. Digital covens span continents. The witch has never been more connected or more alive. And so, the echo of history warns us. Fear and ignorance have burned too many at the stake. The witch, villain to some, heroine to others, refuses to vanish. She changes shape, wears new names, yet her essence remains untouched. Because witchcraft was never just about spells or curses. It is about the oldest dance humanity knows, the dance with mystery, with power, with the endless unknown.